We talk endlessly about morning routines, the 5 a.m. club, the cold plunges, the journaling, the sunrise runs, the influencers filming themselves making a green smoothie before the sun's even up. There's an entire industry built around the idea that waking up early is a moral achievement, that if you're not up before dawn, you're somehow behind in the race of life, losing hours that everyone else is supposedly using more wisely than you. But there's this whole category of people for whom that advice doesn't just feel hard. It feels like it's fighting biology itself. You know the feeling. It's 11 p.m. and something switches on. Your thoughts get clearer. Ideas start connecting in ways they didn't all day. You could write, solve problems, have the best conversation you've had all week. And it's happening while everyone else around you is asleep. The house goes quiet. The notifications stop. Your brain for the first time all day gets loud, in the best possible way. You get more done in that 1 hour than you did in the previous 6. And then the guilt creeps in. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that this isn't normal. That staying up late means you're undisciplined, lazy, bad with time management. That if you just tried a little harder, drank less caffeine, went to bed on time, you'd be one of those effortless morning people who win the day before 8 a.m. You've probably tried it. The early bedtime, the alarm at 6, the forced enthusiasm for a sunrise you didn't actually want to see. You lay there for an hour, wide awake, angry at yourself for not being tired yet. And it didn't work, not because you lack willpower, but because something deeper was working against you the entire time, something you were never taught to look for. Here's what's actually happening. Your sleep-wake cycle isn't just a habit you picked up somewhere along the way. It's a biological rhythm called your chronotype, and it's largely written into your genes. Researchers have identified variations in genes like PR3 that directly influence whether your internal clock runs early or late, whether your body naturally wants to wind down at 9 p.m. or come alive closer to midnight. Some people are wired to peak in the morning, others are wired to peak at night. Neither is a character flaw, and neither one is a more correct way to be human. Both are simply different hardware running the same basic software. A study published in Nature Communications analysed genetic data from hundreds of thousands of participants and identified dozens of genetic variants associated with whether someone naturally identifies as a morning person or an evening person. This isn't a preference you develop through habit or a bad routine you fell into during a stressful semester. It's closer to being left-handed or right-handed, a trait your body arrived with, long before anyone ever told you what a productive morning was supposed to look like. But here's what's fascinating. Night owls aren't staying up simply because they're avoiding sleep, or scrolling their phones out of boredom, or lacking the discipline to close the laptop. Research on delayed sleep phase patterns shows that for many night owls, melatonin, the hormone responsible for signaling it's time to wind down, is released significantly later in the day than it is for early risers. Their bodies aren't behind schedule. They're operating on an entirely different internal timetable, one that was never going to sync neatly with a standard 9-to-5 world built by and for a different chronotype entirely. So when a night owl tries to force an early bedtime, they're not just being stubborn or careless. They're lying in bed, biologically wide awake, while their own brain chemistry insists it isn't time to sleep yet. And no amount of willpower changes what their hormones are actually doing in that moment. And when the alarm goes off at 6 a.m, they're not lazy for struggling to get up. In terms of their internal clock, they're essentially being woken in the middle of their own night and expected to perform as if they aren't. But wait, it gets weirder. Some research suggests night owls may actually show measurable cognitive advantages later in the day. Studies comparing chronotypes have found sharper reasoning, stronger working memory, and more flexible creative problem-solving in evening hours for night owls compared to their morning-oriented counterparts performing the same tasks at the same time of day. The culture tends to celebrate the early risers' 6 a.m. productivity, post it online, build entire brands around it, and completely overlook the fact that a night owl's sharpest, most capable hours might just be happening on a different clock, one nobody ever built a culture of praise around, because nobody's awake to see it happen. And it's not just about individual willpower versus individual biology. It plays out in relationships too. Maybe you've dated or lived with a morning person, and the tension wasn't really about laziness at all, It was two nervous systems running on different clocks, each one quietly assuming the other was doing something wrong. The early riser can't understand why you're still up. You can't understand why they're already asleep before anything interesting has even started. Neither of you is broken. You're just out of sync, biologically, in a way neither of you was ever taught to name. There's also a common myth worth addressing directly. That night owls simply haven't tried hard enough to fix their schedule. Some researchers have studied exactly this, deliberately shifting people's sleep schedules earlier through structured light exposure and consistent wake times. And it does work to a degree. Chronotype has some flexibility, especially earlier in life. But here's the part that rarely gets mentioned. Even after weeks of forcing an earlier schedule, many night owls' underlying biological markers, their core body temperature rhythm, their melatonin timing, remained closer to their original, later pattern. You can override your chronotype temporarily through sheer environmental pressure. You usually can't erase it. Think about it. Nearly every major institution around us, school start times, standard office hours, the entire successful people wake up at 5 a.m. content ecosystem, is built around one chronotype's peak window. Not because it's objectively the superior way to function, or because science has proven mornings make better decisions. Because it happened to be more socially convenient historically to structure a civilization around larks than owls. Farms needed daylight. Factories needed shifts. And that inherited structure quietly became a moral judgment about who counts as disciplined. So the night owl spends years absorbing the message that they're lesser, less disciplined, less put together, less capable of adulting properly, whatever that's supposed to mean. When really they've simply been asked over and over from childhood classrooms to adult careers to perform on a schedule their biology was never built for, and then blamed personally for the friction that mismatch created. Here's the emotional shift. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not failing some universal objective standard of what a productive human being looks like, no matter how many productivity gurus insist otherwise. You have a nervous system running on a rhythm that differs from the one the culture around you happened to standardize. And there is real published science behind exactly why that is, not just a convenient excuse you've been telling yourself. That doesn't mean you get to ignore every early obligation, or that your job's 9 a.m. meeting is suddenly going to reschedule itself around your biology. The world isn't going to rebuild itself around your chronotype overnight. But it does mean the exhaustion, the guilt, the quiet shame you've carried about your best hours somehow being the wrong ones. That was never really about laziness. It was a mismatch between your biology and a schedule you didn't design, didn't choose, and never actually agreed to. And once you can name that clearly, something shifts. The shame starts to lose its grip because shame needs a story where you're the one who failed. And this was never that kind of story. Maybe the goal isn't forcing yourself into someone else's rhythm and calling it discipline. Maybe it's finally understanding your own rhythm well enough to work with it, protecting your best hours where you can, instead of spending years quietly fighting your own biology and losing every single time. That might mean negotiating a later start time where you have any flexibility to do so. It might mean saving your hardest, most demanding thinking for the hours your brain is actually built to do it in, instead of forcing it into a 9 a.m. slot, because that's when everyone else expects focus to happen. Small adjustments, built around your actual biology instead of against it, tend to compound over time into something that finally feels less like a daily fight. You're not a broken early riser. You're a fully functioning night owl. And once you stop measuring your worth against the wrong clock, you might realize your 11 p.m. brain was never the problem. It might have been one of your biggest advantages all along. You just never had permission to see it that way, because nobody ever told you the science was on your side. If this made you see your own nights a little differently, hit subscribe. This channel breaks down the psychology of exactly who you are, one video at a time, so you can finally stop measuring yourself against a version of normal that was never built with you in mind. And if you have a friend who swears they come alive after dark, send them this one. They'll know exactly what it means before you even explain it.